Welcome everyone, this is Bob Jakowski. It's a pleasure to have you join us today for today's webinar. Every 2 weeks, we have an interactive webinar like we have today to really share with you best practices around revenue growth, share with you innovations that perhaps you can't find anywhere else, and really think about new ways for you to scale your company to not only increase your top line revenue growth, but to do it so it's very profitable, it's very predictable, and it's very consistent. So again, thanks for your participation today, and keep those questions coming. Today, our topic is how to create sales and revenue velocity for your company. And the key word today is velocity. So we're going to really talk about that. We're going to talk about what are the things that you can do today to create incredible velocity. So whether you're selling to the enterprise and you have a 6 to 12 month sales cycle, and it requires a lot of people involved from the prospect or the buyers, or whether you're selling transactional solutions. We want to introduce ways that you can actually create this revenue engine for your company, but also create the velocity. So we're going to step you through that process today. Now, we've got really a diverse set of companies joining us for today's webinar. We have professional services companies joining us, IT consulting companies that offer engineering solutions. One company is offering a PLM compliance solutions. Another company is offering employee benefit programs. Another one is offering leadership and learning solutions. Another one is offering software testing solutions. So the things we're going to talk about today are going to apply to each of you in terms of the right go-to-nuggets that you can take back to the office today and really share with your team and implement with success and with the continuity. We also would like to get your questions, so please post your questions in the chat box here. We'll make sure that we get those questions and we'll address them either during the Q&A session or before the end of today's webinar. We also have a couple polls that we'd like to ask you to participate in and love to get your feedback so we can talk about things and share with you what's important to you. So again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. So I'm Bob Jakowski, and Craig and I co-founded our Revenue Acceleration Agency 12 years ago. And really, it's with a mission to help you scale and grow revenue. And do it, as we talked about, in a very predictable, scalable, capital efficient manner. For myself, I've been a serial CEO in Silicon Valley for both public and private companies. And I've had the good fortune of building many different companies at different stages. So requiring different things for different stages. Obviously, when you're a startup company, you've got a different set of challenges than if you're a public company. For Craig's been a serial CMO in Silicon Valley, also with public and private companies. He also has done a tremendous amount of work around branding with some of the big agencies in San Francisco, working with companies like Google, Levi Strauss, Nike, and many other significant players. So really working with some iconic companies, but most importantly, understanding how to brand a company, how to position, and how to really think about the buyer and what's important to the buyer. As we talk today, we want to talk about some of the challenges that many of us face. So one of the things that you hear from typically Forrester, one of the preeminent research companies, is that 90% of the marketing deliverables that are created in most companies are not even used by the sales team. So we really want to talk about a different tact, if you will, that you can use in terms of creating the right offers for the buyers, but also the right sales tools for your organization. Creation of demand for many companies is hit and miss. Often I'll talk to executives and they'll share with me the tremendous amount of experimentation that they've done or with the CMO, different things that they've tried. In many cases, finding things that may or may not work. And so it's really thinking through and saying, what's going to be appropriate for this audience, for our audience, and what's going to engage them with us, and what's going to accelerate that engagement process. Another challenge for many companies is marketing investments are in many cases not tied to sales outcomes so that you can assess and improve the ROI. And so it's not unusual to talk to a CEO, as we did recently in California. And he shared with us that he spends over $500,000 on marketing. And he says, if you could just help me figure out how this investment turns into sales outcomes and revenue, I would really appreciate that. And then another interesting thing is, even if you do start creating leads in marketing, typically for most B2B companies, 90% of those leads are not sales ready. So we're going to talk today about how you can enable that process with your champion that you're working with. So let's start off with a poll. What's your biggest challenge in creating sales and revenue velocity for your company? And if you don't mind, I'd love to get your opinion on this. I'm going to launch this. So you could say that you need better sales performance. That's going to be the key. You could say that you need to create more leads and opportunities for your sales organization. You may perhaps, on the third area, need sales velocity to shorten the sales cycle. Perhaps you need better ways to engage your target audience. Or you need a revenue growth engine, as described earlier. So just go ahead if you could and share your thoughts, and I'll share this effort with everybody on the webinar today. And thank you for participating. Okay, if we've got everybody's input, that's fantastic. Let me go ahead and share that. So 8% of you stated that you need better sales performance. The winner is 42% stated that you need to create more leads and opportunities for your organization. 17% stated that you need sales velocity to shorten the sales cycle. And 33% stated that you need better ways to engage your target audience. Fantastic. So we're going to make sure that we address each of these areas as we go through today's webinar. So thank you for participating. For our agenda today, we're going to really cover 4 major areas. The first is to start with your revenue growth plan and best practices. So you start with that, you say, what do we want to achieve in 2020, 2021 in terms of revenue growth? And what are the best practices that are going to assist us in this area? Next, we're going to talk about providing the sales tools and the enablement for success. The third area is creating that demand for your solutions and services and putting in what we call the revenue growth engine. And finally, we're going to really talk about velocity and how velocity can help improve the underlying profitability for each of your sales opportunities that you close. The first thing that some of you may have seen from us, if this is your repeat attendee, then you'd see our revenue acceleration map. And the revenue acceleration map is something that Craig and I created at Intact a number of years ago as we were scaling a cloud solutions company in Silicon Valley and adding another 5,000 customers and 300 sell-through partners. And so we started putting together this map because we said there's got to be a way to, and a set of best practices that we can apply to our business model in terms of how to scale revenue. The good news for all of us is that we've perfected this with many companies over the past 12 years, and it really has blossomed into this best practices revenue model that we have today. So this is the revenue acceleration map, and we'll be sending a copy to each of you that are joining us today. And you can see that there are 7 areas on here. The first one is revenue engineering, and we're going to cover an example in just a moment. The second is around strategy and having the strategic insight into your target audience, into your buyer. Areas 3 and 4 is really about marketing execution. 5 and 6 is about sales execution. And 7 is about revenue growth vectors, such as working with partners, entering new markets in a capital efficient way, or working with the upsell cross-sell strategy that you have with your current customers. So let's look at some metrics here. Let's say as an example for this year, let's just say for one of your verticals in healthcare, your objective was to, and is, to close another $4 million of net new revenue business for the company. And let's say that the average transaction is $100,000. So from that perspective, you know that you're going to need 40 new customers to achieve that revenue target. Now, this last funnel is the sales funnel, and if your conversion rate is 1 out of 4 or 25%, you're going to need 160 sales opportunities or 6 sales qualified leads in order for this to happen. This middle funnel is your lead conversion funnel. So what you need to do here in the first one is create with marketing, with your marketing activities, your marketing programs and campaigns. You need to create at least 133 per month of people that are raising their hand in your target audience and saying, I'm interested in your company. I'm interested in your solutions. And from that interest level, becoming what we call a market qualified lead, now you need to convert that market qualified lead into a sales qualified lead. And that means that there's a fair amount of education, there's a fair amount of enablement that needs to happen from your sales team with your champion, if you will, or champions that you're working with at the prospect. So these are the metrics that we look at. And by the way, you can look at these metrics that we put together, and we actually will help you create these for your company. You can look at them on an industry basis. You can look at these on a solution basis. Let's say you have, like one of our customers, Technical Toolboxes, let's say you have 12 different solutions. So we may have a set of funnels here for each solution set that they provide. If you're another customer like ICUC, where you're selling into industries, then we would have 12 of these funnels for each industry because they're penetrating and successful in 12 industries. So it's a great way to look at that. So the first thing is to look at your goals and to look at this revenue engineering. Let's move on to the second area though, which is, and many of you have heard this, and that is there's a buyer's journey and there's a seller's journey. And one of the keys is to really understand the buyer's journey. And if you're looking at your sales team, whether that be direct sales or whether through partners, you're really thinking about how does our sales team enable the buyer's journey, help the buyer, consult with the buyer, and provide the steps that they're going to go through in a frictionless way. So it's all about speed, it's about velocity, it's about eliminating friction. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is enabling your sales team. First and foremost, your sales team has to have the right tools, the right vehicles, the right knowledge to be able to walk a buyer through the sales cycle and walk the buyer through the buying process. And so what we found is in many cases, we talk about marketing first, but really what we found as we worked with more and more companies is, do they have the sales tools in place that they can position themselves to be successful in repetitively closing the sales process with each new prospect? And so let me walk you through some of these and talk about each of them. There is the solution overview, and the solution overview is typically focused around what are the pains or business challenges that you're helping your buyer address and serve, and what are the value propositions that you offer. There is something that Craig's going to share with you called the Buyer's Guide. And some of you may have seen one of these, some of you may not. And that is, how does somebody, if they don't understand how to buy or evaluate your type of solution, how would they do that? So why not have a Buyer's Guide? And we'll show you an example of that. In many cases, another key to move your buyer through the buying process is an ROI guide. So where's the ROI? Where's the payback if they invest in your service? And how would they think about doing that? A recorded presentation or demonstration is also very useful in the sales cycle. We often find as we're working with our clients that they're using a lot of manpower, they're using a lot of pre-sales engineers or SMEs, sales subject matter experts, to provide demonstrations or presentations to unqualified prospects. So a great way to do this is to provide those recorded presentations or demonstrations up front. Another thing that we look at as far as getting velocity with the buyer's journey here is an FAQ ebook. So for every prospect that goes through a sales cycle with your company, I'll bet that there's 20 things that they ask over and over again. So why not create a frequently asked question guide and provide all the answers proactively to that organization. Customer and industry success stories are truly important. They tend to be, in many cases, one of the greatest obstacles before somebody is willing to make an investment and purchase from you, because they're looking at how to mitigate risk. And one of the best ways to do that is understand how other customers in their industry, for instance, have been successful with your service. And finally, optimizing the pricing and bundling of solutions. So, for instance, one of our clients that we work with, a company called Scoodude, they started off with one solution, and then over time they added 14 additional solutions. So one of the things that we help them do is rethink about how to optimize around suites and the right bundles for the target audience, as opposed to their sales team trying to sell 15 different point solutions. So when we think about this first step in the area of sales tools and enablement, we think about not only can these be used in the sales cycle, but they can also be used in your marketing efforts. So for instance, if you are looking at some customer success stories, that is something that is tremendous that your prospects would like to learn from you. So if somebody hasn't figured out how to buy your type of service, a buyer's guide would be hugely important. So what we're doing here is we're not only equipping the sales team, but we're also equipping your champion buyer that you're working with. So that's one of the first areas we talk about, is providing the sales tools and enablement. Craig, can you take a few moments and just walk through a buyer's guide example and share with our audience the value of a buyer's guide?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. I'm projecting a buyer's guide that we created for one of our clients, Logiware. Logiware is one of the largest global shipping software providers in the world. And their goal and challenge was to articulate their solution to a much wider audience. Now, as communicators, one of our challenges is not just to present what a solution does. So while that has its place within that communication and narrative flow, one of the things that we need to do that's fundamental, and it's often overlooked, is to set preferences. And the preferences for your solution relative to a competitor's solution is typically different. And so our goal is to say, this is how you should consider the best way of buying a solution. And in this case, we came up with 5 criteria for Logiware to sell their solution, their software, to international shippers. Now, this was about resetting expectations for the buyers as to how they should evaluate the software before we got into the details. And it's absolutely fundamental. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that our job as communicators is to set those preferences, is to win against the competitors. And if you do a solid job in setting the communication at the onset better than your competitor, then you probably will win the deal over them. And in this case, that's what we did with Logiware, where we said, these are the 5 must-have criteria that you need to evaluate a solution. Now, again, the competitors may have something slightly different, but what you're doing is you're presenting a biased perspective, albeit you're not saying that, you're presenting a biased perspective on how to evaluate. And we come in as part of the communication flow and recommend strongly about, building and articulating this set of criteria into a buyer's guide. So this gives one sense of we have multiple solutions that do this, and I'll give this back to you, Bob, and we'll talk about something a little later.
Perfect. Thanks, Craig. Okay. So that's an excellent example of a buyer's guide and how it can actually help accelerate your sales process. In many cases, like I said, if somebody hasn't purchased or invested in your type of solution before, they may not know what they should be looking at, what their criteria should be, and how they should go about doing that. But a buyer's guide, as Craig showed, is an excellent way to begin that process. Now, the second area we want to talk about is creating a revenue growth engine. And this is really fundamental to your company because it's not, as you know, with revenue growth, it's a process. It's a fundamental, important, critical process for your company, for your team to master. And so we want to talk about how would you go about putting that in place. So essentially, if we look at these steps here, let me walk you through this. We talked about some of the tools in the essential area for the sales team. And so now what we want to talk about is the next step, which is how do you put this engine in place so that you can scale it? So this is really focusing around marketing and thinking through what's important to your buyer. One of the things that we've done this with hundreds of companies, and we've just kind of learned through this process and perfected it, is really to understand what's important to the buyer. So when you look at your buyer today and you say, well, I'd like to have a lot more intelligence about our buyer, what's important to them. Could we figure out for the 20 pains that we solve or business challenges that we're going to help them address, which are most important to them? If we put our value propositions in place today and ask that audience to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, how would they rank them? And if we're going to create these offers, this engagement, these conversations, what does our buyer really want? So we figured out that a rigorous market survey with your buyer is probably one of the most important things that you could do in terms of understanding them. Many companies that we work with have done a good job surveying their customers. What we're looking at is those companies in your addressable audience that are not your customer. The other key here is creating the offers and the content track for areas that are important to your prospective buyer, such as what are the top business challenges that you actually help your audience address or solve. Or when we do a survey, we do this type of survey, a lot of times peers want to know what their peers are thinking. So if you're providing a solution, let's say to CFOs, then they would love to know what other CFOs are thinking about, what's important to them. So that's another offer we do. There's a lot of different offers that can go down this path. When you start thinking about this, you think about, okay, so if you could create, let's say 50 or 100 or 500 market qualified leads every month, then you're going to need to be able to qualify those, follow up with them with either your SDRs, BDR teams that you have, and convert those into sales qualified leads. And so that becomes an important next step. Another thing that we look at is just advising on the marketing campaigns. What are the right campaigns? What are the right offers? Which campaigns would be most effective with your target audience? And then you've got to have a record of a source of truth, if you will. And so in many cases, what Craig and I and our team actually do is help put in a marketing automation system, whether it be a HubSpot, a Pardot, a Marketo, something like that. And the objective there is to have one source of truth. Now, Craig, you've been putting these systems in place with many companies. What have you found as you begin working with companies that may have a solution like this today?
Sure. So thank you for that, Bob. So I'm going to go ahead and show something, if you don't mind, making me presenter. And what I've found mostly is that companies buy these systems with the intent of automating, but they never get further along than just creating a marketing email engine. And unfortunately, and this goes, I would say, for 90% of the companies out there, unfortunately, this is the case. I'm going to show my window. This is the case with most companies. So how do you take it from just an email engine, which you can use MailChimp or some other very, very basic tool to do, and make it into a powerful marketing engine that really helps track your prospects and track them from the contact stage all the way through the sale, and then ultimately into upselling and cross-selling. So we come in and we would help you evaluate your system and put in place a fundamental best practice. And what we're showing here is just a structure that we come in to put we superimpose a structure into your system, your marketing automation system, so that it optimizes the flow of the contact. It allows your marketing team to create more targeted messages and as we go into the CRM system here, it allows those contacts from when they've been converted into leads, allows those contacts and leads to be converted into opportunities and tracked in a very systematic way so that you can ultimately track and measure on the results all the way from the contact through the sale. Now that's fundamental for the executives at the company as you're trying to assess what your ROI is. As you think about why you put these systems in place, on one level, it's to automate and create efficiency and to create more campaigns. There is that aspect. The other aspect is how do you become a more efficient, sales-driven organization? And you become that by measuring, by improving how you're actually doing things. And ultimately, in the reporting structure of your CRM, you can begin looking at those details. And if you're looking at the right metrics, and we have a full set of best practice metrics that we come in and we recommend putting in for your company, if you're looking at the correct metrics, you'll quickly, within 3 to 4 to 5 months, begin seeing improvements in your contact to lead, your lead to opportunity, and your opportunity to sales flow. And that's because you can begin looking at the numbers that matter, and you can begin making adjustments at the correct juncture, whether that's putting in better sales tools between the lead to opportunity, whether that's improving how you're communicating to your contacts, or a number of different mechanisms. But the fundamental issue is why we put this in place is to improve sales. Improving the efficiency is from our perspective an ancillary improvement. It's ultimately to improve sales, looking at the key metrics and improving incrementally across that entire flow and interrogating it on a month-to-month basis. Does that answer your question, Bob?
It does. That's very good. Thank you, Craig. Thank you for that. That's fantastic. I think we see, as Craig mentioned, we do see a lot of companies that have implemented different solutions, but they're not getting the reward out of that implementation. So a lot of times having a different approach, thinking it through how you're going to have complete visibility in terms of your revenue creation process, and then putting in a set of best practices is really fantastic. Especially if you have, let's say, 5,000 or 10,000 visitors coming to your website every month, and then you're trying to figure out how do we score these visitors? How do we grade them? How do we think about where we're going to spend our time in terms of who is most important to our organization and who is most focused on engaging with us? So thank you for that. That's excellent. Sometimes we do get asked also, just in terms of what is the process that we go through. So in many cases, if we do these rigorous surveys that we've done with hundreds of companies, we turn that into we call it a core messaging document, which is a prioritization of what's important, or the distillation of what's important to the target audience, and then produce a roadmap as far as how you would be engaging your prospects over the next 12 months or 24 months. And then you can look at what's the right way to syndicate those set of offers or content that you have, and create the volume and the quality of lead that you need. The objective, of course, as Craig said, is to feed your sales team. And so it's really about creating not only the quantity, but the quality of the sales leads that you're looking for your sales team. So let me talk about this next area, which is about creating sales velocity and improving underlying profitability. We're going to share with you in just a little bit something that we call, and quite a few of these are innovations that we've created at On-Demand Advisors, a sales-driven website. So we realize that many companies have websites. Everybody has a website or multiple websites. The challenge is when you go to the website, is the website guiding you through the buying process? And so that's one of the real keys. So if I come in and I am in the healthcare industry and I come to your website, I just really want to see information and offers and engagement and customer case stories that are significant to me as a healthcare company. If I come in and I'm in the food business, I really want to see what you're doing for food processors and distribution companies. They help me understand that. So it's really about enabling the buyer's journey, and it's also about eliminating the friction. And in a moment, I'll have Craig share with you an example. Some of the other things that you can do, though, to increase velocity is you can create, we do this for companies, explainer videos. So really talking about how often is it that you go to a website and you're not really quite sure what the company does. So an explainer video is a great way for you to be able to put that on the front end and enable that. Another thing that we often are involved with is creating what we call, or Gartner calls, competitive battle cards. And that's really, when you think about it, you have a SWOT. Your company has a SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So we could profile that with you. Your competitors also have a SWOT. And so one of the things that we do when we put together these competitive battle cards is enable your sales team to understand precisely how they're going to win against each competitor. Another way that you can accelerate your sales process today is by providing upfront assessments or diagnostic offers. And so we'll often do that because it gives you deep discovery that you're looking for with prospects at the beginning, where you can truly understand where they are today and help assess how to move them down the path where they want to get to. Another area for acceleration is what we call the implementation success blueprint. And this is really a blueprinting process that we've created where you start helping your prospect imagine the successful implementation they're going to have with your service or your solution. Once you do that, you start moving somebody from evaluation to implementation. And then finally, we're excited to offer this year called the Accelerated Contracting Vehicle. So we figured out how to eliminate 90% of the time in negotiations that happens today with your solutions. And that's the Accelerated Contracting Vehicle that we have today. And it's marvelous. We implemented this at Intact, and we found that less than 10% of our target audience, companies of all sizes, would actually engage to negotiate the contracts. So as we move forward, the world of contracts becomes more and more complicated because you've got privacy agreements, you have SLAs, you have service agreements, you may have subscription agreements. And so it becomes more complicated, and we need to uncomplicate that, especially when you're dealing with Fortune 1000 companies, so that you don't spend a lot of time in this space. Okay, so what we'd like to do now is Craig's going to share with you an example of one of our clients where we worked with them to deploy a sales-driven website.
Perfect. Bob, can you make me presenter again?
I sure can.
All right. Thank you, Bob. So what we're projecting now is one of our sales-driven websites, and this is another client of ours, Technical Toolboxes. And Technical Toolboxes offers software solutions to the oil and gas industry out of Houston. So their challenge initially, when they began talking with us, is that they had over 200 different software tools that they were basically throwing over the fence, using that metaphor, to their audience. The challenge was they were leaving their audience rather puzzled as to how to engage with them and how to buy a particular solution. So what we advised was to put in place a sales-driven website. What a sales-driven website is, just like the buyer's guide, it begins setting preferences, it begins taking the buyer down a very specific path. Now, that pathway could take two different directions, and I'm going to show you both of those. And I'm hovering over the window here. One is about roles. And in the case of technical toolboxes, they sold to 6 different engineer types: a corrosion engineer, crossing engineer, design engineer, etc. Each one of those engineers had a different requirement for the software. And so consequently, what we allowed them to do was opt in based on role. When they opted in based on role, it allowed them to see only the solutions that were specific to them, so that it cut out all the noise and it presented essentially a very streamlined path from solution to purchase. The other way, given that they were a deeply product-centric company, was to present the solutions still in their product form, but bundling them differently so that they were far more digestible to the audience. And in this case, we presented it in the functional areas. So instead of having just, say, 200 different software packages, we narrowed this down into the fundamental bundles that the different engineers would utilize. And here's an example. So let's just really quickly go into one of the engineering role types. So when somebody clicks on a role, such as I just clicked on corrosion engineer, they're presented with the specific solutions that are relevant to them. And in this case, there were 6: corrosion analysis, data automation, failed audit, etc. These are different software solutions only for this type of engineer. Now you'll notice here, what we have here is a secondary menu, and this is the buyer flow. So in the buyer flow, we have the overview, we have the challenges, we have the solutions, we have FAQs, we have clients that are recommended for validation, and then we have next steps. So with every one of these buyer flows, we present the specific solution that's relevant to the role, we present the solution, we present questions that are frequently asked, we present validation points, and then how to engage, whether those are demos, customer case stories, buyer's guides, a number of different ways. But again, when we get back to the narrative, keep the narrative concise, keep it on target to the role, and you will enjoy a much more streamlined flow from that prospect to sale. Bob, you have any other questions you'd like me to answer on the buyer-driven website?
No, none at this time. We'll get to the Q&A here in just a moment, Craig, but that's fantastic overview of a sales-driven website. So really, based upon what Craig was sharing with you, it is about velocity. It's about velocity. Velocity is important. Velocity matters. Craig, you just shared with you how you can gain velocity with your buyer coming to your website. We talked earlier about building your revenue growth engine so that you have the right quantity and quality of leads. And we talked even before that about sales tools. And not just to provide sales tools, but how do you convert your buyer and move them from one step of the buyer's journey to the next? So all these things married together are powerful ingredients for the revenue growth that you're looking for your company today. So what we're going to do right now is Greg shared with you that story. Just a couple data points here in terms of clients. For those of you that are solution providers, a lot of times you're saying, okay, so how would this work for a solution provider? So one of our clients is Avid Exchange out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and they provide solutions in the accounts payable, paperless invoicing, and e-payment solutions area. And they really wanted to figure out how could they double revenue every year going forward. So we worked with Mike, the CEO, and Mike's team, and we were able to help them not only do that, go from a 6.5 million revenue growth annual to 65 in 4 years, but also to expand and win first in their initial market, but then get into 6 different markets and do that in a very efficient way. So that's an example of working with a solution-based company. For a services company, a pure services company, example would be ICUC. ICUC is a global social media management services company. They've got a presence in 35 countries. And their chief performance officer came to a webinar like this and said, you know, we're doing okay, but I need to grow revenue by 67% year over year. And so how could you actually help me do that? And so we did that, and we've had the good fortune of working with ICUC for many years. And not only increasing the number of leads, but also moving to vertical-based messaging. So instead of one horizontal, we found out from surveying their audience that their audience, if I'm Starbucks, I wanted to understand who else in the food and beverage industry you work with. If I'm Novartis, I'd like to understand who else you're working with in pharma, so I understand how social media is used in pharma. So we really were able to get very specific into each of those industries. Same thing if I'm with Google, I'd like to understand how you're working with technology companies. So here's another poll that we'd like to ask each of you to participate in. And thank you so much. So one of the things that we're always interested in is, from your perspective, what's your major takeaway from today? And so let me go ahead and offer some options here and launch this. So from a polling perspective, you may say, gee, you know, give sales the tools that they require to sell. That's a major takeaway that you'd have for today. Another one would be, let's put in place a revenue growth engine, as Bob has shared with us today. A third area would be to create more demand for your solutions and your services. A fourth would be to increase sales velocity with some of the ideas that we discussed here today. And the fifth is really determine the best path forward, still thinking about some of the information that we've been able to share. And by the way, we are recording this webinar, so if you have colleagues within your firm that you'd like to share this with, we'll be happy to provide that with after today's webinar. So go ahead and, if you will, and we're still collecting results, go ahead and participate in our poll, and I'll share this with everybody today. So thank you very much. Okay, let me go ahead and share the results. So for 18% of you, you stated that give sales the tools that they need or required to sell. That's really powerful. That's really important. I would imagine if you sat down today with your sales team and you looked at some of the things that they need to enable them to move the buyer from one step to the next in the sales process, there are some things that you'd find are gaps today, or some things that you want to improve on. 36% of you stated that you'd like to put in place a revenue growth engine, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that, about what's in place and what you want to put in place to actually really fine tune and put that engine in place. So 9% stated that it's creating more demand for your solutions and services, and 36% stated that you'd like to increase sales velocity with some of these ideas. So that's excellent. We just think that there are so many wonderful, proven ways that you can increase the velocity with your buyer today, and we're happy to share some of those ideas with you. One of the main pivots that we look at in many cases is transforming a company from an informational website to a sales-driven website, which accelerates the sales process. And in many cases, when we've done that, it will accelerate the sales process up to 33% of that cycle. So thank you very much for that. Let me go ahead and close the information on the poll here. Now what I like to do is open this up for Q&A. So please go ahead and post what questions you have for Craig and I, and we'd be most happy to address these questions. Okay. Okay, this one is from Victoria. Victoria says, we need better sales performance and more leads and opportunities. That's fantastic. You're absolutely right, Victoria. Totally understand where you're coming from. So hopefully we've discussed a number of ways that we can help you improve that. On the sales performance side, it's really looking at, a lot of times we focus on hiring the right people, but it's looking at really providing them with the right tools. And something else that we often will do is create a sales playbook so that when you're onboarding your sales team, they know exactly who the personas are, who the buyers are, what's the sales process, how do they engage, what are the scripts, how do they take people through the sales process, and where do they find the right tools and vehicles to be able to do that. So that's often, that's a great question. So thank you for that, Candace. Appreciate that. Let's see, I have to log off, but want to thank you for your presentation. Seems like we are on the right track, but love some of the ideas that you have around sales enablement. So thank you very much, appreciate that. This one is from Shannon. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Shannon. Okay, let's move on to the next one here. We've got lots of questions here today from our audience, which we really appreciate. Here's a question. We work with biotech industries, and they are tight-lipped about their needs and source products. How do we get them to open up? Well, that's interesting. So everybody has to take their solutions to market. And I understand working with biotech companies. In fact, I was a CEO and chair for a CEO group in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And in San Francisco, many of the companies I worked with were biotech companies. So I understand the need for secrecy, for privacy. But in the end, when you look at the biotech companies, one thing that they really look at is their peers. So if you're working with a biotech company, let's say you're working with Amgen, then what these companies are typically interested in is how are you working with other biotech companies? So one of the things that we look at doing is creating these type of industry case studies, examples, where you demonstrated benefit for one customer, and they can start understanding how they can use your service or your solutions to benefit other customers. So that's really interesting. But happy to talk to you offline about this further, because it's really an excellent question that we get sometimes, which is how do you get your prospects to open up? Okay, let's see. Here's another question that we have. Here's a question. How do you move a sales team from only talking about features to solutions for needs? Well, it's excellent. Excellent question, because there are a lot of sales teams out there, great question, that are focused on tactical sales. And they're very comfortable talking about their products or services, but they're not really talking about what's important to the buyer. So one of the ways that we figured out how to retrain the mindset of the sales team is when we go out and we do these type of rigorous surveys, as an example, we really figure out what's important to the buyer. Then we can then say, okay, these are the things that are most important to your buyer. And then what we do is we provide that as part of the sales training for the sales team, because in many cases, your sales organization is only going to be comfortable selling based upon what they know. So if they're comfortable around the product, the features and functions, that's where they're going to stay. But if you can educate them about what's important to the buyer, what the buyer wants, and what they want to hear from them, then you can start moving that pendulum from being a order taker, if you will, for a product or service, to be a consultative sales executive, helping guide the buyer through the buyer's journey. And we think that that's one of the most transformational things that we actually help companies do, which is think very differently about this. So great question, Dave. So thank you very much for that question. Here's one. We are a magazine, so offer solutions for readers as well as advertisers. Should we put solutions for each on the same website, and how do you do that without putting off the other ones? So that's an interesting question. So when you think about that, we do get in a situation where sometimes we'll think about whether it makes sense to have everything on one website or whether we create microsites. And I'll give you an example. One of the clients that Craig and I are working with has both transactional offerings as well as enterprise offerings. So what we're talking to them about is having a separate microsite just for the transactional offerings. And they like that a lot because oftentimes you can go to one website, you can get lost. And in this case, since these transactional offerings that they're working with are from partners, they can keep that separate but connected to their main website. And then depending upon the partnership that they have going forward, they can decide whether they're going to continue that microsite or not. But great question, and I'm happy to take this offline further with you to talk further about your specific needs. So thank you, Jenny. Okay, let's see, get to maybe perhaps one or two more questions. This one is from Tracy. Tracy asks, she says, we need better SQLs. How can we do that? Well, that's a great question, Tracy. Just to hit the finer point here, what we find is the type of information, the content, like the buyer's guide, the ROI guide, the solution overview, if they're really done well, they're going to educate your prospects. And what your salespeople want before they engage is they want educated potential buyers who start really understanding before they engage about your solutions and services. And Gartner Group is really interesting. They said that 57% of the sales process is already accomplished by the time the buyer engages with the salesperson. That means that you've got a lot of the sales process already underway by the time a salesperson is actively involved with the buyer. And so it's really important that you're able to provide the type of vehicles like we talked about and the website that we talked about to help educate and to move your buyer through the buying process. Let's have time for perhaps one more. And this is from Tony. Tony says, how do we best gauge the right program for any given company? Okay, that's good. I think that, Tony, a good way to think about that is we'd sit down and have a conversation with you, really to assess where you're at today and where you want to get to, and really think through what's the gap analysis. So is the gap that you have today in sales execution, for instance, having the right sales tools? Is the gap today that you have in that you don't have enough leads or enough high quality leads, and so you really need to put in the engine to get that number up? Is the gap that you have today perhaps that you want a better partner program where you work with better partners that are going to drive revenue? And we can talk through those issues and topics. Is the gap perhaps that you want to perhaps change the way you're packaging today some of your solutions or services? So depending upon where you are, we're happy to sit down with you and come up with the best path forward. And that probably is a great way for us to take us to the next slide here, which is a little bit about potential next steps. So next steps for you today, and thank you very much for joining us, is to review the Revenue Acceleration Map. Be happy to sit down with you on a Zoom or GoToMeeting and talk through that with you. If you'd like to assess where you are with your sales tools, if you'd like to assess where you are with demand creation or how you can actually increase sales velocity. Just let us know. We'll be sending a copy of our recorded demonstration from today, as well as these offers along the way. And please feel free, there's no obligation on your side. We'd like to help you be successful this year, especially moving forward in terms of revenue growth. Now, on the 30th of this month, on July 30th, we're going to have a similar webinar, and it's going to be focused on how to select the right partners to drive revenue growth. So one thing that we learned at Intact as we onboarded 300 different sell-through partners is there's really a right way to do that. And so it's often the case we talk to executives, talk to the head of business development, and they're saying we've got all these partners signed up, but they're not producing revenue for us. So how do we change that up? And that's what we're going to talk about on the 30th. So please join us for that. We'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Bob Jakowski, Craig Remy, and our entire On-Demand Advisors team. We'd like to thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. We appreciate your participation. We'd like to help you further your revenue growth success for this year and help you focus on winning your markets and doing that profitably. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for today. Have a great day.